When I was 8 years old, I got given a book. This book, as it happens. It's called Full Throttle, and it is by Sir Henry Tim Birkin. And within these covers, the tales of daring do sparked something within me which has never really left. And of all the cars that Birkin raced in his tragically short career, there was one that he loved the most. And that car is this car, his own beloved Blower Bentley. And when I say Blower Bentley, I don't mean one of the 50 Blower Bentleys that got made. I mean this actual car. So what is so important about this Bentley? There were lots of racing Bentleys. Well, the difference with this one is that unlike most racing cars, frankly almost all racing cars that get crashed, they get pulled apart, they get put back together again, they get lots of new bits. They end up turning into Trigger's broom. This Bentley is pretty much identical to how it was when Birkin raced it here at Le Mans in 1930. So you know that when you get into the driving seat, the wheel that you hold is the wheel that Birkin held. These are the instruments that he looked at, and down there in the footwell are the pedals that he pressed. This is even the upholstery that he sat on. Now, you like me have probably seen old vintage Bentleys wandering down motorways every so often, and you may have wondered by looking at this, well, what makes this a racing Bentley? Well, if you look closely, the evidence is absolutely everywhere you care to look. We will start down here with this fishtail exhaust. That was actually done, apparently, for noise regulations at Le Mans in the day. And then there is, of course, this simply enormous fuel tank. I think it holds about 40 gallons. You need that when you're driving this round here. The car does about 12 miles to the gallon on the road, so when racing at Le Mans, goodness knows. It also has a very quick release. Moving down the side of the car, you will notice that there is no driver's door. If you get in the back, there's a door. In the front, you don't, because it's actually quicker to have this cut out, and so you can just leap over the side into the car. Very handy. You will notice that despite the fact that Bentleys were legendarily heavy cars, they've still managed to drill the handbrake just to save the odd gram here and there. Next we get to the bonnet vents. Now, most vintage Bentleys have bonnet vents, and quite a few of them have these straps over them, but none of them have the vents on the top. They were put there just to extract more heat during the heat of the race. Round the front we'll see another quick release filler, that's for the water, and down here obviously the simply enormous Amherst Villiers supercharger, although that was clearly common to all the Blower Bentleys regardless of whether they were used for road driving or racing on tracks. And below this plaque, which is a list of all the things that it did during its competition life, you can see there is quick access to the oil filler, which means that you can fill the car up with oil during a pit stop without needing to lift the bonnet. Very handy. You will see here that underneath this protective windshield is another filler cap. Well, that's actually for a reserve oil tank, and what would happen is that your riding mechanic would notice that the oil pressure was starting to dip, and instead of the car having to come into the pits, he could just literally dump the contents of this tank straight into the engine from where he was sitting, which is pretty good. Now, because I am not Tim Birkin, and because this may be Le Mans, but it is not the Le Mans race, I'm afraid, going to do the full leap over the side. I'm going to try the slightly less inelegant way into the car of going through the passenger seat. So basically, you get into the passenger seat, shut your door, and shufty across. Even inside the cockpit, there is yet more evidence that this was no ordinary Bentley. Things like here on the door, you had your pit signals painted. This here is a lap counter, which reputedly was stolen from a bar in Paris on their way down from Cricklewood to Le Mans. There is a map reading light here, and this may look like a normal clock, but it's actually a stopwatch, something else you wouldn't ever get in a normal Bentley. Another neat trick contained within this Bentley is it could suffer complete electrical failure and keep going. Firstly, the spark for the engine is generated not electrically but mechanically by these magnetos. Secondly, it does have electric fuel pumps, but if they fail, you can just pump the fuel through by hand like this. Again, not something you would ever find on a road-going Bentley. So there is but one question remaining. With a car like this, how on earth do you drive it? That's quite impressive, wasn't it? The first thing you need to learn about driving this car is not to be scared of it. It is, at the end of the day, just a car with a steering wheel, 3 pedals and a gear lever. But it doesn't work in quite the same way as modern cars, so we need an expert to talk us around. So to help try to understand this car, we have with us today Keith Downey. Now Keith is one of the luckiest people in the world because he gets to look after this car. There are just 3 people in all of Bentley who are authorised to drive this blower. There is the chief executive, there is the chief engineer, and there is Keith. So Keith, there is nobody better to talk us around this car. Can you just explain to us how it works and maybe just give us a quick guided tour of the cockpit, because to me that looks like it's just come out of some kind of World War II fighter plane.
Right, we'll start off from this side. Far corner here, we have a speedometer.
Yeah, that I can understand.
Yeah. Then the clock with a stopwatch.
Okay.
Next we have the air pressure gauges for the fuel.
Okay, so you've got, and there are 2 of those. Is that because you can pump the fuel electrically and manually?
Yeah, that's the manual pump.
Okay.
The electric pump valves, and you have the option to pump manually there. Next to that, you have the engine oil pressure.
Yeah.
Then ref counter, nice big gauge, you can see it's quite important.
And it only redlined at 3,500.
Yeah, it's got a red line at 4.5, but
I think that's probably a Birkin red line, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 3.5. Then you have the boost pressure gauge.
Yep.
Supercharger. That's the car gas for a cold start.
So that's like a choke?
Yeah.
Okay.
Light switches.
Okay.
Then ammeter.
Yep.
Magneto switches.
Okay.
Fuel pump.
Yep.
Fuel temperature.
Yep.
And engine coolant temperature.
And these things over here, which appear to be dripping oil.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. They're dripping oil.
Why are they doing that?
That's the feed to the supercharger, oil feed.
And why do you need to be able to see the oil dripping?
Just to make sure it's doing its job.
Right.
And it should be, I think it's 10 drips a minute. I think
10 drips a minute.
Yeah.
So you're thundering down the Moortown Straight, counting the drips.
That's it. Yeah.
And I guess when the oil gets thinner, it drips more, and so you tighten it up.
So these are adjustable.
Understood. Lovely. So Keith, if I'm completely honest with you, I'm a bit nervous about driving this car, and not just because it's worth more millions than I can count. I'm expecting it to make quite a few noises when I change gears. So just reassure me that as a seasoned professional, that even you occasionally can get the odd unpleasant noise to come out of the gearbox of the car. Never. Good. Excellent. That's just what I wanted to hear. Well, I don't think there's anything more to do than go make some noises. That's what happens when you turn the lights on instead of the magnetos. It'll start now. So what we're going to do first of all is just go for a little drive. Not going to go fast, we're just going to see what this thing feels like. So I'm driving the wrong way around the Le Mans circuit, bizarrely enough. And the view down the bonnet is dominated by the vents on top of the bonnet and the quick release filler cap on the water, on the radiator. I have already what I'd like to call Bentley trousers, which is the black mark that appears on your trousers from where this simply enormous steering wheel rubs up against them. You get that after about half an hour in the car. You sit quite high up in the car. It's not quite like an SUV, but it's certainly not like a conventional sports car driving position. Your actual location behind the wheel is really pretty good. The pedals are near enough straight ahead of you. They're slightly displaced to the left, but nothing particularly problematic. And the seat slides fore and aft as you'd expect. So even if you're 6'4" like me, it's not that difficult to get yourself comfortable behind the wheel. I'm not doing very well with these gear changes. Hang on, cut all this. I know what I've done. I haven't put the reverse détente down. So, I will now be able to change gear. In theory, at least. So what I'm going to do now is just drive away and see if I can get some clean changes up to top gear, just to give you an idea of the real difficulty of this car, which is just managing the gearbox. The problem is, without any synchromesh, you really need to know in advance what the ratios are. So that was a reasonably slow change from first to second, because there's quite a big gap between first to second. Conversely, second to third is quite quick. So you can change gear that quickly. But because this has a very high fourth, with the very high top speeds this car would need to reach on Mulsanne, third to fourth is actually really very slow. So you come out of third into neutral, wait, and then put it into fourth. Changing down is inherently more difficult than changing up, because not only do you have to double the clutch and get your timing right, you also have to blip the throttle in the middle to match the speed of the gearbox to the speed of the engine in the gear it's going to be in. So I'm going to try and do fourth to third. So neutral, lift, third. And that's, if you're lucky, how you do it. I've been thinking as I drive, what kind of modern car would possess this level of performance? And it's a little difficult to tell because I'm clearly not going to use all the revs today. But if you look at the numbers, weighs about 1,500 kilos, would have about 240 horsepower. That strikes me as about approximate to brand new Golf GTI performance, which is, by I think any standards, pretty quick. So if comparing the performance of this car to a modern Golf GTI gives it a kind of modern context, perhaps it's also appropriate to give an idea of what it would have been like compared to other cars that were around in the day. Well, if you bought an Austin 7 in 1930, which was kind of like the standard transport for British people at the time, it would probably cruise at 30 to 35 miles an hour. Flat out, if you were brave enough, you might get it up to 40 or 45. Now this car, we know because it's done it, has been timed at 126. So references to it being the Bugatti Chiron of its day are not out of place at all compared to what normal people would understand to be strong performance of a road car. This thing was a rocket ship. Birkin was a notorious car breaker. It was his view that a car should be built to put up with whatever he could chuck at it, and if it couldn't put up with that, then that was the car's fault and not his. So this car was meant to rev to about 3,500 revs. Birkin, I'm quite sure, would rev it way past 4,500 maybe. And really, if you really want to extract the maximum performance from this engine, I suppose with all engines, you've really got to rev and rev and rev it. Now, sadly, I'm not going to be the one who puts a hole in the side of the block of this particular engine. So I can only really give you an idea by revving it to maybe 2,500, 3,000 revs, which may sound like nothing in these days when cars rev to 8,000 or 9,000 revs, but it's still actually, you know, right in the meat of this car's torque curve, and will give you a very real impression of how fast this car could go. The only thing I have to do is just change up a bit early. So this is almost walking pace, second gear, foot down, going uphill, and it's just pulling like a train. 1,500 revs, 2,000 revs, 2,500 revs, that's nearly 3,000. And that's probably all I want to chuck at it. As for the handling, well, you've just got to get used to it, really. You have a steering system that's, unlike modern steering system, is not very precise at all. You have about that much lost motion in the wheel before it'll even start to change direction. But then when it does, it actually does so quite precisely. And you know, you have no problem at all hitting your apexes, and the car really does always go pretty precisely where you point it. As for the car's behaviour on the limit, well, the blowers, all the blowers were limited by the fact that the supercharger itself put a great deal of weight just where you didn't want it, right in front of the car, ahead of the front axle, because the engine itself is set quite a long way behind the front axle. But putting all that weight out front did make them understeer quite a lot. Now the car has, by vintage Bentley standards, quite a short wheelbase, and it's quite good at getting into the corners, but you still have to be very conservative with your entry speed. And if I'm honest with you, it likes fast corners better than slow corners. Straight through the Dunlop chicane, it feels a little cumbersome, but then if you go down over the other side of Dunlop and go down through the S towards Terre Rouge, it actually feels, well, I was going to say nimble, which is clearly ridiculous, but it feels very confident, it feels very manageable, and it is, of course, immensely good fun. So I would say the car's greatest shortcoming, particularly given the considerable power that's at your disposal, are the brakes. Now, again, these things are all relative. If you were to drive this car and you tried to stop like a modern car, you would just crash it. If, however, you understand that the braking capacity is quite limited and you manage the car around that, they're actually perfectly good. They don't fade very much, and they're at least completely consistent. They will slow the car in a straight line every single time. So I'm just going to run the car up and down the track one more time. Just go at a reasonable speed. Frankly, because, well, I can. Approaching Dunlop. Tricky third to second down change now, which I'll probably get wrong. No, managed it. That's good. Keep it completely off the curbs. Do not want to be rattling this thing over the curbs. Going up underneath the Dunlop bridge now. Down through the curves. This is just, wow, what a thing to be able to do. What a thing to be able to do. We're coming down to the S's. Could be second gear, but the car has so much torque, you can just leave it in third and power it through. That's what you want to do with the supercharger. You just want to use the torque, keep the gears up, and then it's just beautiful. In the quick corners, it just comes alive in your hands. This is Terre Rouge, which if there wasn't a barrier at the end of it, you'd probably be in fourth gear and hammer down, but sadly, I've got to slow down. It is the end of the day. The car is driven and I have the trousers to prove it. I am, frankly, a hot, sweaty, exhausted mess, desperately in need of a bath and a beer, not necessarily in that order. By contrast, despite being out in 35-degree heat all day, this car has not missed one beat. What have I learnt? Well, I think the answer comes in two parts. Firstly, if you want to drive, if you're lucky enough to be able to drive a blower Bentley reasonably quickly around Le Mans, you do need a modicum of skill. You need quite a lot of mechanical sympathy and you need a whole heap of upper body strength. But perhaps more importantly, what today has done is afforded me just the smallest glimpse of what Birkin and his comrades got up to here all those decades ago. And frankly, it beggars belief. Tragically, Birkin died 3 years after the race that he and this car made famous. But his spirit lives on in this car, and the really good news is it's going to outlive us all.